Chair now recognizes Mr. Van Orden for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming, Mr. Secretary. And I just want to be super clear. All these subjects are incredibly important. But I want to kind of return to a bit of the things that my great friend and colleague from the state of Minnesota were discussing with you. And that's the actual real effects of some of the Biden administration's policy. I come from the state of Wisconsin, which is the home of the Republican Party, Ripon, Wisconsin. The Republican Party was established by a group of abolitionists whose sole intent for forming the Republican Party was to abolish slavery in the United States of America. And I think that's an incredibly proud tradition that we have as Republicans. We were preceded in abolition by the British, but the British approached this in a very interesting method. They didn't come out and abolish slavery immediately. They did something called the Slave Trade Act of 1807, where they essentially abolished the ability for people to transport human beings as chattel on British vessels. And as you know, at the time, the British and the Dutch had the preponderance of global trade. So what that did, Mr. Secretary, is it essentially dried up the ability for people to sell human beings. And it wasn't until 1883 with the Slave Abolition Act that they actually abolished slavery. The United States didn't abolish slavery officially until December 6, 1865. That's when the 13th Amendment was ratified, and that's after 360,222 Union soldiers died. So it is my understanding the Biden administration wants 50% of all electric vehicles or new production vehicles to be electric by 2030. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the goal.
Okay, I mean, honestly, it sort of begs the question of whether or not you discussed that with the UAW prior to coming up with that timeline, but that's a subject for another day. Are you aware that approximately 4.3% of electric batteries are comprised of cobalt at this time as of 2023?
I'm sorry, I had a little trouble hearing you. 4.3%?
Do you understand that approximately 4.3% of all electric batteries are comprised of cobalt?
Yes.
Okay. Do you understand that approximately 70% of the world's cobalt is produced by the Democratic Republic of Congo?
Yes.
Do you understand that 15 to 30% of the cobalt that is mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo is mined in something called an artesian mine?
I haven't seen that figure, but it's credible.
It's correct. Hey, will you pull that up real quick? Let's pull this picture up. I want you to look at this. Do you believe the United States government has a moral obligation to try to end child slavery?
Of course.
Okay. And that would be regardless of the impact it would have on your 2030 date for electrification of 50% of the fleet?
Sure, it's why we're working so hard to have domestic sourcing of both the supply chain and the raw materials that go into electric
my time is
vehicle
limited.
batteries.
I do not mean to cut you off, but I'm going to. So are you telling me that you're willing to move that to the right, your goal of 2030, 50% of all the fleet electrified, if it can help end child slavery?
I'm telling you that the solution to this is not to ban cell phones or give up on electric vehicles. It is to make sure that more of their components are sourced
I am asking you a very straightforward
domestically.
question about the most horrific thing that exists in the planet today, and that is slavery. So I'm going to ask you another question. Knowing what you know about the Democratic Republic of Congo, the mining of cobalt by children, including those kids right there, right here, that's cobalt. So knowing what you know about that, what is your office's estimate of how many children will be required to mine your cobalt, and how many of these children do you estimate will die to make sure that you can make your goal of 2030? Have you done that work?
We have better data on how many children will die if we allow climate change to increase unimpeded.
Hey, you know what, man? I am absolutely not taking that. That is a dodge and it's junk.
It's the truth.
Let's do this again. Let's do this again, Mr. Secretary.
Congressman, what that child and that child and that child and that
How about
child and
this
the
one?
child behind that child and the child behind that child
I am
deserve
not
is
going
your
to
support
allow
in
you to
domestic
hide behind
and
climate
ethical
change.
sourcing of the components that go into all of the products
So
that we buy in this
what
country.
you are telling me is this, is that your office is putting your goal of 2030 above the welfare of those children. And you are encouraging and
That is nonsense,
subsidizing
Representative.
child slavery. You are, sir.
That is nonsense,
That is
Representative.
not nonsense. That's a fact. And by the way, I'm gonna submit for the record a whole ton of paperwork for you, Mr. Secretary. I'd like you to review it. And the top of that's gonna be this picture.
That
I will
picture is
have
full
no
of children
part.
who deserve
I will have no
policy
part.
that will support domestic and
gentleman's
ethical
time has
sourcing of
expired.
these materials and help to prevent
Very well.
climate
I will
change.
have no part subsidizing child slavery.
The
You're a
You
gentleman-
may have
time
one
is-
that you're not thinking about,
The gentleman's
Representative.
time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.